Montana Territory, 1879. The wind clawed at Fiona Vance's bonnet as she stared at the rail line that curved out of town like a snake slipping into the hills. Her heart beat faster than the train's whistle. She clutched the hem of her skirt and stepped off the platform, boots hitting the dust with purpose. Behind her, the town of Helena began to stir awake, but she would not be here to see the day bloom. She had not cried when her father told her she would marry a man she had never met. A merchant from Butte, twice her age, with a reputation for treating women like possessions. "It is a good match," her mother had said, not meeting her eyes. "He has money. You will be safe." Safe. Fiona had never once felt safe in a cage. So, she packed her satchel during the night, only what she could carry. A change of clothes, her mother's worn Bible, and the small tin box with her grandmother's wedding ring inside. She left a note beneath the pitcher on the kitchen table and slipped out before the sun had touched the windows. The train would take her as far as Dillon, but beyond that, she had no plan. The only thing she knew was that she would not hand her life over to a stranger. By midday, she stepped off the train into the dry heat of a town she had never seen before. She walked west, away from the tracks, into a land that smelled like dust and pine. It was all too big and too quiet, and she had never felt so small. Her legs ached by the time the sun began to sink behind the hills. She had not seen a soul since leaving town. Then, just as she began to doubt everything, she heard the soft rhythm of hooves. A horse crested the ridge ahead, ridden by a man who pulled his hat low when he saw her. He slowed as he approached, his horse coming to an easy stop a few feet away. "You all right, miss?" he asked, his voice low and calm. Fiona squared her shoulders. "I am not hurt." He looked her over. Dust on her hem, boots too clean for distance walking, satchel clutched too tight in her hands. "You lost." "I am not going back," she said, sharper than she meant to. "So if you are here to take me somewhere, you can turn around." His brows lifted slightly. "I am not here to take you anywhere. Just saw a woman walking alone near sundown and figured I ought to check." She hesitated. He did not look like a man who lied. His shirt was rolled to the elbows, sun-dark skin catching the last light. His eyes were steady, the color of wet bark. "I left home," she said finally. "They wanted me to marry someone I had never met." He nodded once, not surprised. "Name's Zeke Rowen. I have a small place about an hour's ride west. You are welcome to stay the night. I will sleep in the barn, you can take the house. You can decide what to do in the morning." She studied him. His horse stood easy beneath him, and he had not moved to come closer. There was nothing pushy in his voice, nothing slick in his eyes. Fiona nodded slowly. "All right." He dismounted, handed her the reins, and walked beside her as the horse carried her down the slope. Zeke's land was tucked against a line of cottonwoods with a creek running slow out back. The house was small but neat, a single room with shuttered windows and a wood stove in the corner. He lit a lantern and left her there, heading to the barn with a blanket thrown over one shoulder. She watched him walk through the dark, knowing she should be afraid. But all she felt was tired. The next morning, she stood at the edge of the creek, brushing her hair with her fingers when he stepped out of the barn. "You eat eggs?" he called. She turned. "Yes." He nodded and ducked back inside. They ate by the stove, him in a chair, her on a crate. She did not speak much, and he did not press her. When she offered to leave, he only said, "You are welcome to stay as long as you need." Days passed. She helped with the chickens, fed his mare, learned to split kindling. Fiona liked the quiet. She liked the way Zeke watched her, but never cornered her. He was gentle with the animals, patient with the land. One afternoon, after the rain, she stepped outside to see him sitting on the porch, sharpening a blade. He looked up, eyes soft. "You do not have to tell me what happened," he said. "But I am glad you ran." She sat beside him. "I did not want to live someone else's life." He nodded. "I know that feeling." She looked at his hands, strong and steady. "Did you run too?" He paused. "Used to ride with a cattle drive. Left Texas when I was 17. My father thought I was wasting my time dreaming about my own land." "Do you miss it?" "No," he said. "I found something better." She smiled, a small, real one. That night, she could not sleep. She stepped outside, the air cool against her skin. Zeke was there, sitting by the fire he had built behind the house. He looked up. Could not sleep either? She shook her head. He nodded toward the stump beside him. She sat. The fire crackled. She watched the flames dance against the night. I have never had a place that felt like mine, she said. You do now? She turned to him. Do I? He looked at her, eyes steady. You do, Fiona. She did not look away. Neither did he. The next morning, she found her hands brushing his when they both reached for the same bucket. Neither pulled back. Later, when he showed her how to ride his mare bareback, he kept his hands gently at her waist before letting go. She did not fall. She laughed. He washed her with something warm in his chest he had not felt in years. That night, as the stars spread across the sky like spilled flour, she sat beside him again. I do not want to leave, she said. He looked at her. Then do not. She turned to him. Would it be all right if I stayed? He reached for her hand. It would be more than all right. Fiona smiled, eyes bright in the firelight. And for the first time in her life, she felt chosen not for duty, not for family, but for herself. And Zeke, who had lived quiet for so long, felt the hollowness in his chest finally fill. They did not speak of love yet, but it was there, growing, quiet and steady like the trees by the creek. And neither of them would ever run again. The first frost came before the leaves had finished turning, and Fiona woke to a thin crust of ice along the window pane, her breath rising in pale clouds. Zeke had left a fire going in the stove before dawn, the room still warm with its fading glow. He was already outside when she stepped onto the porch, his coat unbuttoned, sleeves damp from the morning's work. She hugged the shawl tighter around her shoulders. You always start this early? He scraped dirt from the sole of his boot, then looked up. Animals don't care what the thermometer says. She knelt beside the stack of firewood and lifted a log. Then neither do I. That morning, Zeke taught her how to repair a cracked fence post near the south edge of the property. The ground was stiff beneath their boots, and the iron nails bit into the wood like teeth. Fiona's hands blistered before noon, but she said nothing. Zeke noticed, though. He handed her his gloves without a word. Later, as they sat on the porch steps eating boiled potatoes wrapped in cloth, he broke the silence. You ever think about where you'd go if you kept on walking? She chewed slowly. I used to, before I got here. And now, she folded the cloth on her lap. Now I think about what I could build if I stayed. He didn't respond right away. He just stared out over the pasture, where his mare grazed in the gold-tinged grass. Takes more than lumber and hands to build something worth keeping. I know. He glanced at her then, something cautious in his gaze, like a man reaching into cold water. That evening, as she washed her hands in a tin basin out back, she heard a wagon creak along the road. Zeke stepped from the barn, wiping sawdust off his shoulders. You expecting anyone? She asked. No, a boy no older than 12 guided the reins, his legs too short to reach the footboard. His face was smudged, coat hanging loose off one shoulder. An older man sat beside him, hunched and coughing into a handkerchief. Zeke walked out to meet them. Fiona followed. The boy pulled the team to a stop. Sorry to trouble you. My uncle took sick just past the last ridge. We're heading toward Bannack, but he can't go farther today. Zeke's jaw tightened. There's a cot in the barn. You can rest there tonight. The boy nodded. Thank you, sir. Fiona helped them unload. The man's breath rattled in his chest as they settled him into the straw. She soaked cloth with cool water and laid it across his brow. The boy watched her hands with wide eyes. You a nurse? No, just someone who's had to learn to care for people. He looked down. My ma died before I could remember her. My uncle's all I got. She pressed the cloth gently against the man's temple. Then we'll do what we can. That night, Zeke sat on the porch rail, watching the barn. Fiona joined him, arms crossed tight against the cold. He's too sick for the boy to manage alone, she said. I know. She hesitated. We could take them to Bannack when the uncle's strong enough. Or let the boy stay a while, help work the land. Zeke didn't answer right away. You think you'll still be here then? She turned toward him. Yes. His gaze didn't waver. Good. The next morning, the uncle's fever broke. Fiona brought him warm broth while Zeke showed the boy how to brush the mare without spooking her. The boy laughed when the horse nuzzled his shoulder. Zeke glanced toward the house. Fiona stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled, hair braided back. She looked different than she had that first day's sun on her skin, steadiness in her gaze. That night, as the boy slept in the hayloft and his uncle dozed close by, Zeke poured 2 mugs of chicory and handed her one. They sat near the fire behind the house, a new chill in the breeze. I used to think quiet meant lonely, she said. And now it just means peace. Zeke looked into the flames. I never wanted to build something alone. Just didn't think I had another way. She turned toward him. You do now? He met her eyes, and this time he didn't look away. So do you? She reached for his hand, and he let her take it, their fingers tangling slow and sure. No words passed between them after that. None were needed. By dawn, the frost had thickened across the pasture, but inside the house, the warmth held strong. Fiona rose early, lit the stove, and started kneading a small loaf of bread. Zeke stepped in from the cold, the scent catching him before he spoke. He watched her for a moment, something tender softening his face. He didn't say, "You belong here." He didn't need to. The wind carried a sharper edge by late October, and the cottonwoods along the creek had shed most of their leaves, their branches bare and brittle against the pale sky. Fiona stood at the chopping block beside the house, splitting the last of the smaller logs into stove-length pieces. The axe was heavier than she preferred, but her strokes had grown cleaner over the weeks, her rhythm steady. Zeke returned from the ridge with the boy, Levi, seated behind him on the mare. The saddle creaked as they dismounted, both with cheeks flushed from the cold. Zeke gave her a nod as he led the horse to water, and Levi hurried toward the barn, boots thudding hard on the packed ground. He's taken to the chores like he was born to it, Fiona said, wiping splinters from her palms. Zeke poured a pail of water into the trough. Says he wants to build his own homestead one day. She leaned the axe against the stump. He's young enough to dream it and old enough to mean it. Zeke glanced toward the barn. His uncle's fever's lifted, but his lungs are ruined. Can't travel far anymore. Fiona's brows drew in. Will they stay here? If they want to. She nodded once, then turned toward the house. I'll start supper. He'll be hungry. That evening, after the stew had been scraped clean and Levi had gone off to check the traps with a lantern swinging from his hand, Zeke lingered near the door, one shoulder against the frame. Fiona was mending a tear in her skirt, her needle moving quick and sure. You've been quiet, she said. Been thinking. She looked up. My father had a pair of oxen when I was young. One mean as a rattler, the other so gentle he'd let you climb his back. My father yoked them together every spring, said the stubborn one needed the calm one to keep him straight. Fiona set the needle down. You think we're yoked? Feels like it, sometimes. I'm steadier with you here. She blinked once, then reached for the thread again, though her hands hesitated. I never thought I'd be somewhere that felt like it didn't need proving. Zeke stepped closer, slow. What if this place wasn't just shelter anymore? She met his eyes. Then what would it be? Home, he said. The fire popped, and the shadows leaned closer around them. She didn't answer, only reached across the table and turned her palm upward. He placed his hand in hers. 2 days later, Levi brought in a muskrat from the trapline, proud and breathless. Fiona helped him skin it, showing him how to stretch the hide without tearing it. The boy's uncle, Emery, sat nearby on a stool, wrapped in a quilt Zeke had stitched from old flannel. I never thought I'd see a woman teach a boy how to clean a pelt, Emery said, voice raspy but amused. Fiona smiled faintly. I never thought I'd have the chance. He studied her face. You're not from out here, are you? No, you're staying? Yes. He nodded once. Zeke's a rare sort. Lost his brother in Kansas, never said much about it, but it changed him. He used to ride like the devil was on his heels. Now he just wants peace. Fiona tied off the last corner of the hide. So do I. That night, Zeke didn't light the fire behind the house. Instead, he brought 2 chairs onto the porch and poured her a glass of blackberry cordial from the bottle he kept for winters. They sat close, knees brushing. I didn't think there'd be room for anyone else in my life, he said, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. But you came in quiet and didn't take up space. I just found myself making more. She turned toward him. I don't need much. You've changed everything. Fiona reached out and touched the collar of his shirt, fingers resting against the worn fabric. Then we've done the same for each other. He leaned in and kissed her, careful and certain. There was no rush in it, only the deep knowing of 2 people who had already chosen. The next morning, Fiona opened the heavy chest at the foot of the bed and placed her grandmother's tin box inside. She had no need to carry it anymore. The past had already been walked through. When she stepped outside, Zeke was waiting with the mare saddled and a second horse beside her, reins looped over the rail. He handed Fiona the bridle. I thought we might go out past the ridge. There's a stretch of land I've been thinking about fencing for winter pasture. She mounted without hesitation. Let's see it. As they rode out, side by side, the land opened before them, gold stubble, low hills, and the promise of snow in the far-off clouds. Everything they needed was behind them. Everything they wanted was ahead. And between them, the quiet, steady bond of two people who had chosen each other not with words, but with every shared hour, every quiet morning, every hand extended without demand. They didn't speak as they rode. They didn't need to. They were already home. The first snow came slow, falling in long, soundless threads just after dawn. Fiona stepped outside with a shawl over her shoulders and watched it settle soft across the porch rail, the barn roof, the crooked fence beyond. The land, so loud with color a few weeks before, had gone quiet and pale. Inside, Zeke was fitting new hinges on the pantry door, his shirt sleeves rolled but his hands clean. She leaned in the doorway and waited until he looked up. "Do you ever miss the trail?" she asked. He set the hinge down gently, rubbed his thumb across his jaw. "Sometimes. Not the dust or the long nights, but the space, the way the sky stretched out forever." She stepped into the room, her voice thoughtful. "I used to think freedom was about leaving things behind, but I think maybe it's about choosing where to stay." He stood and crossed the room, stopping just before her. "You sure this is where you want to stay?" "I'm sure." They didn't touch, didn't need to. The stove crackled behind her, and his breath warmed the space between them. Zeke went back to the hinges without another word, and Fiona unpacked the sack of dry beans she'd bartered for at the mercantile in Bannack the week before. The storekeeper's wife had looked her over with narrowed eyes, but Fiona had held her ground. She had something solid behind her now. That afternoon, Emery sat on the porch with his feet wrapped in a wool blanket while Levi brought in the last of the corn husks. Fiona helped Zeke oil the harnesses in the barn. The air inside smelled of leather and hay, and snowflakes drifted through the open loft window. Zeke handed her a brush, and she worked it gently over the mare's flanks. "Levi's been asking about schooling," he said after a moment. "Says he can't read more than a few words." Fiona nodded. "I can teach him." Zeke's hand paused over the saddle strap. "You ever think about teaching other children?" She looked up. "There aren't many out here." "There will be. People are settling closer all the time." She considered that, her gaze distant. "I'd like that. To be useful that way." He smiled, just a little. "You already are." Later, when Levi came in with red cheeks and a grin too wide for his face, Fiona set him to wiping down the boots by the door. Zeke passed her a folded scrap of paper, torn from an old ledger. "Found this in town a while back. Thought you'd make better use of it than I would." She unfolded it. The handwriting was crooked but careful, some rancher's notes on crop yields. She ran her fingers over the columns and lines. "I'll teach him with this," she said. That evening, they all sat close to the stove while the wind howled outside. Levi read aloud, stumbling over the word barley twice before getting it right. Emery fell asleep with a blanket tucked up to his chin. When Levi finally nodded off on the floor, Fiona gathered the papers and set them aside. Zeke poured warm water from the kettle and passed her a cup. They sat quiet for a while, the silence not heavy, just full. He watched her hands, the way they curled around the tin cup. "You're not the same woman who stepped off the trail that day." "No," she said. "I'm not. I don't know what your life was before," he began, then stopped. She looked at him. "You can ask." Zeke met her gaze. "Did anyone ever make you feel seen before?" She didn't answer right away. "I think I was always something to manage, like a room that needed sweeping." "Then I hope you know," he said, voice steady. "You don't need fixing or shrinking." Her throat tightened. She reached out and laid her palm over his. "I know." The next morning, the snow deepened, and the world outside blurred to soft white. Fiona opened the shutter just enough to see the fence line vanish into the hush. Zeke came up behind her, his warmth at her back. "Could be snowed in a while. I don't mind." He slid his arm gently around her waist, and they stood there, shoulder to shoulder, watching the storm fold around them. Outside, the wind carried on. Inside, there was only steadiness, only warmth, only them. By early December, the snow lay thick across the pasture, the creek frozen in its bend and the trees bare as bone. Smoke curled steady from the chimney, and the house held warmth like a kept promise. The days passed with purpose, chores done with quiet discipline, meals made from careful stores, and evenings shaped around the firelight and each other. One morning, Fiona stood at the table, laying out flour for bread, when she paused and pressed a hand to her belly. She didn't speak, just stayed still for a moment, her gaze settling on the window where frost webbed the corners. Zeke stepped in with a bundle of kindling, stamping snow from his boots. "You all right?" She looked over at him, her hand still resting low. "I think I might be carrying." Zeke set the bundle down slow. "You certain?" "Not yet, but I've been late, and I've felt different." He crossed to her, his expression unreadable at first. Then he reached out, not to touch her belly, but to take her hand. "However this goes, we're all right. You and me." She nodded, the weight of the moment anchoring her feet. "I know." They said nothing more, but that night, he pulled the quilt higher around her, his hand resting over hers as they lay together, the fire throwing soft light across the rafters. In the days that followed, Fiona moved with a new awareness. She paced herself differently, paused when lifting the water bucket, and ate more in the mornings. She didn't speak of it often, but Zeke watched her more closely, always careful not to hover. Levi noticed before anyone said a word. One afternoon, he stopped stacking the feed sacks and asked, "Is there going to be a baby?" Fiona looked up from where she was sorting dried herbs. "Why would you think that? You're quieter than usual. And Zeke keeps checking on you like you might vanish." She smiled faintly. "Nothing's settled yet." Levi shrugged. "If there is, I can help. You've helped plenty already. Still, I wouldn't mind." That evening, Zeke brought out a small wooden box from the barn. He'd been carving it in the early hours before chores: soft pine, smooth corners, a lid that fit snug. "I thought it could hold things," he said, setting it in her lap. "Whatever you want to keep safe." Fiona opened it, ran her fingers over the inside. "I'll start with this," she said, slipping in a folded scrap of cloth from her mother's apron. "And later, maybe a first tooth or a lock of hair." Zeke didn't answer, but he kissed her then, slow and warm, the kind of kiss that made the cold outside feel far away. By midwinter, Emery had taken to the smaller room off the kitchen, his cough softened by the warmer air and stronger broth. He spent most of his time stitching a patchwork from old shirts, saying he wanted the boy to have something of his when he was gone. He never said it with sadness, just fact. Levi continued schooling with Fiona each morning, reading from old almanacs and copying letters on scrap paper. He was quick with numbers and better with patience than most grown men. One morning, as Fiona poured hot water for washing, Emery cleared his throat and nodded toward the window. "You and Zeke plan to make it official?" She dried her hands. "We already have, in our way." He leaned back in the chair. "I believe that. Still, there's peace in knowing the law sees it too." She glanced toward the barn where Zeke was mending a harness. "We've spoken about it. You should, before there's a cradle in that corner." She smiled then. "We will." The next week, Zeke hitched the mare and drove them into Bannack through knee-deep snow and biting wind. They married in the back room of the mercantile, the storekeeper's wife serving as witness with a baby on her hip. The paper was signed, the words spoken low but sure, and Fiona wore a dress stitched from old muslin, dyed soft blue with crushed berries. They didn't make a fuss. They didn't need to. Back at the homestead, Levi had swept the house and laid out a cloth on the table, even found a sprig of dried sage to set in the center. When they walked in, he looked at them both and said, "About time." Winter held hard into the new year, but the house never felt cold. Fiona's belly grew slow and steady, and Zeke learned to cook more than just eggs. Levi built a cradle with help from Emery, who passed in his sleep before the thaw, his quilt folded over his chest. They buried him beneath the cottonwoods near the creek, the ground softened with hot water and time. Zeke said a few words. Levi placed the quilt in the grave, and Fiona stood with her hand in Zeke's, the wind tugging at her shawl, but never breaking her stillness. Spring came with meltwater and the first shoots of green. The baby arrived in May, born just past dawn with the windows open to birdsong. Fiona labored with her jaw set and her eyes steady, and Zeke never left her side. When the child finally cried, it was strong and full, like the sky cracking open after a long storm. They named her Clara, after Zeke's mother. Levi held her with both arms, careful and proud. "She's got your mouth," he told Fiona. Zeke just kissed Fiona's temple and whispered, "She's got your strength." The days that followed were slow and golden. Fiona nursed by the window while Zeke worked the field, and Levi ran messages into town, always returning with stories and a sack of something sweet. By the time Clara took her first steps, the trees had bloomed again. Fiona planted herbs behind the house, and Zeke carved her a stool for the garden. They built a lean-to for the animals and added a second table for the growing number of neighbors who came by to trade goods and share news. One evening, with Clara asleep and Levi reading by the hearth, Zeke pulled Fiona out onto the porch. The stars were sharp above them, the grass whispering below. "You still glad you stayed?" he asked. She leaned into him, her voice quiet. "Every day." He rested his chin on her hair. "I never thought I'd have this." "You earned it." "So did you." They stood there long after the fire inside had gone to coals, the sound of the wind in the cottonwoods and the steady breath between them all the confirmation they needed. Nothing was missing, nothing undone. They had found the kind of love that didn't speak loudly but lived deep in shared work, in quiet touches, in the child sleeping safe inside, in the boy who had become family, in the peace that came not from running, but from staying. And they never left it behind.